Chapter 10. Life's Constant Companion, Death. The bus was on a steep descent. It had left Shimla, the summer capital of erstwhile British India, and the buzz of civilization and the crowd that comes to all the hill stations. One could see the layers of asphalt roads from the window. The coniferous trees abounding the area were thick. Through the window, the fragrance of the resin produced by the trees floated. Across the deep valley on the left, one held the snow-peaked sentinels standing majestically, trying to touch the azure blue sky. On the right-hand side, streams of crystal clear water flowed down the mountain once in a while. The bus was moving silently as the driver had put off the engine, and one could hear the gurgling sound amidst the chatter of passengers inside. Among the passengers, a lady was sitting on the seat in line with the driver's seat. Both the driver as well as the lady suddenly saw a rider on scooter, making a sign to stop the bus. The driver saw him and something sliding from the right-hand top well in time to avert a mishap. The bus came to a screeching halt. The lady and the driver saw two women running in panic with a child in the bosom of one of them. And then she saw it. It was a 1-ton army vehicle sliding down the top like a toy with people in it, turning on the road and resting on the side barricade. Had the bus continued its movement, the army vehicle would have been on top of it. The army vehicle had broken its axle while moving on the top road, and its driver had jumped off, while those inside the vehicle had met their violent fate. All the passengers from the bus got down to assess the damage and found that 6 persons in the vehicle and a man walking on the road had been killed on the spot. Strangely, the milk bottle carried by the man on the road had rolled on the road and was intact. For the lady, it was the turning point in her life, as she felt that she could have been one of those killed in the accident. If one of us faces such and other situations, it's not necessary that the experience has to be first-hand. It can be even indirect. We encounter death in different facades. An old but a dear member of the family is breathing his last. The grandchild, not knowing the implication of death, is curiously observing the last gasp. Its mother, who has been like a daughter to the old man, mutters that all life is only towards this end, the inevitable death. A lady complains of heaviness in the stomach. Her husband takes her to the doctor, who diagnoses the disease to be cancer of the intestine. It's not cancer of one person, but of the whole family. Every day from then on, the death influences the family in all its activity. When it finally comes, after 6 months, the whole family is no doubt sad, but simultaneously relieved that it is finally over. A person on the verge of his retirement is on his final leave. He visits his brother at Bombay and his younger sister at Kadapa in Andhra Pradesh. On the day of his return to Madras, his office receives a call from the police station attached to the Madras Central Railway Station, saying that a person was found dead in a sleeper coach with a visiting card in his shirt pocket, and they ask someone to come to the station to identify the body. It is found to be the same person, and the post-mortem report gives the cause of death to be cardiac arrest in sleep. Everyone who knows him finds it very hard to accept his death, for he used to be a very healthy man. These days, thanks to the speed of civilization Death is just around the corner. An accident, a bomb blast, a terrorist attack, or even a police encounter due to a mistaken identity. Whatever be the cause of death or the age of the dead person, it always leaves the survivors in a pensive or a reflective mood. It is said that all cremation grounds and cemeteries are the conference rooms where the philosophy is discussed. Almost everyone who is present during the last rites understands and accepts that life is impermanent. But after a few days, if not soon, after they return to home, the death is forgotten and one gets into the daily rut and the race for survival. Even a person who had vowed that he or she cannot live without the other begins to accept the death of the other and puts himself or herself into the routine of the struggle for existence. Acharya Shankara calls this dispassion as the smashana vairagya, or the dispassion at the cremation ground. There is an episode in the Mahabharata. The 5 Pandava princes during exile felt extremely thirsty. Yudhishthira, the eldest of the brothers, asks Sahadeva to find water. Nakula climbs a tree to find a lake nearby and guides Sahadeva to the spot. Sahadeva approaches the water and is about to drink. He hears a voice forbidding him to drink before replying to its questions. But the parching thirst is so strong that he takes a drink and falls dead. Due to the inordinate delay in his return, Nakula is sent to find the youngest brother and water. Nakula too meets with the same fate and is followed by Arjuna and Bhimasena. Finally, Yudhishthira himself reaches the spot and is surprised to find all his brothers dead. But he wants to quench his thirst first, and when the voice challenges him to answer its questions, he drops the water from his palm and waits for the questions. An enlightening dialogue follows. Among many questions is one which seeks to know the most wonderful aspect of human behavior. Yudhishthira replies that in spite of seeing death everywhere, man behaves as though the death is only for others and to him it is not a reality. George Gurdjieff used to narrate a parable of a magician shepherd who used to hypnotize each of his sheep that while it was a tiger, the others were sheep. Consequently, whenever one from their own kind and the group was slaughtered, in front of their very eyes, the sheep were never disturbed. This is true of man also. He plans, schemes, and acts as though the death is not for him but only for others. If we go into the reasons for such strange behavior or the forgetfulness, we are surprised to find that it is due to the fear of death. And this fear is so subtle that it manifests in such novel and many times unknown ways that we cannot possibly recognize it. We keep ignoring this fear, much like hiding the skeleton in a cupboard, or sweeping the dust under the carpet. Though we talk philosophy and console others at the time of someone else's death by saying that it is inevitable and unavoidable to all of us one day or the other, we never like to give more thought to it, as it creates a strange kind of discomfort in our hearts. Though we apparently appear to accept its inevitability, we experience an inexpressible fear that shakes us to our roots. To avoid this fear, we occupy ourselves with activity. We take the activity to be an inevitable aspect of life and keep ignoring death through it. However, just by ignoring a problem, it is never solved. It can only be postponed to a future date. We encounter it almost at every step of our so called adult life, and ironically, we keep ignoring it through other occupations. The priorities we keep help us put on the blinkers and to succeed in forgetting the question of death, at least in the present life. A few fortunate, however, cannot ignore this phenomenon permanently when the death is seen in all phases of life. It is like a seed which has the great patience to wait for the right moment and milieu for sprouting. Such persons become sensitive to the wisdom of life through the phenomenon of death. They notice that death has much to offer for life. Thus, a Siddhartha, seeing a funeral procession for the first time, identifies himself with death and develops disinterest in the secular life to begin his quest for a state that transcends death. And Siddhartha ultimately becomes the enlightened one, the Buddha. In more than one sense, without death, life is as meaningless, mechanical repetition, an empty gesture. Even a casual observation of our routine reveals that we keep repeating the same actions from the moment we leave the bed till we enter it again at night. Many a time, even the same thoughts and emotions are repeated. A great truth is discovered when a person notices that he is living with such a bored existence that to break this monotony, we keep changing the objects. If we are bored with some one sense object, we think that by changing it, we can overcome our boredom until the changed object brings us back to the same bored existence. A king came to know that there is a secret spring deep in a jungle with magical waters. By drinking from that spring, one becomes immortal. After searching with much effort, he succeeds in finding the spring. He approaches it alone. It is a cave that is covered by a thick foliage. He enters the cave with all devotion and beholds the spring. On the adjoining rock sits a crow, unafraid and rather in a sad mood. But the king is too excited to notice the mood of the crow. With a lot of excitement, he is about to take a drink when the crow speaks. King is shocked by the strange crow which speaks human language. The crow asks the king as to why the king is interested in drinking from the spring. Gathering his composure, the king replies that he wants to become immortal. The crow observes that it too had drunk from the spring and has been living for thousands of years. Initially, it was happy, very happy, when it noticed that while all its companions had died, it continued living. But when it noticed that the quality of life had not improved, it had to continue hunting for mice for food, doing the same old things without a break. It had started getting bored with life, and moreover, all its companions had died, and the new crows had never accepted it as it is a stranger to them. Fed up with life, it tried to commit suicide but did not succeed. If the king wanted to give it company, he was most welcome to take the drink, but it felt that it was its duty to warn the king. After a while, the king comes out of the cave without drinking. Our view of death is limited to the death of the body, and none of us has really experienced it. And yet, we are afraid of it. This is one of the great paradoxes of spirituality. If we try to analyze our behavior, we'll be able to understand that we cannot possibly be afraid of the death of the body, but we see the aftermath of death, which is not pleasant. We keep seeing that when a person dies, he has to leave his companions, his claim over the possessions, his dreams, and the cruel hand of death takes him away from everything he calls his. We are afraid of this aspect of death and not the death itself. Our life as such is a never-ending race of changing desires and evanescent dreams and our effort to fulfill them. From childhood to old age, through youth and middle age, we keep ourselves busy and occupied with activity to fulfill them. And death snatches away from us this pleasure of activity and the sense of possession. Another thing we notice is that whenever death comes, we are unconscious. It appears that the nature gave us the anesthesia much before we discovered it for bearing the pain. Whenever death is about to strike us, we become unconscious and lose the opportunity to experience it. Thus, death as such is always a stranger to us, of whom we are perpetually afraid. At the same time, we know that there is no way of avoiding it. Knowing that it is inevitable, we start making preparations for the life after death. Consequently, we get a genuine doubt. Is death final, or is there anything that survives it? We begin to notice many theories, convenient or otherwise, that fire our imagination. They fan our desires and fear through the concepts of heaven and hell. In fact, most of the religion as understood and accepted by the common man is based on the fancies of hell and heaven. No doubt, they too have helped humanity in bringing about moral and ethical code in the society. However, the fact remains that man's actions have always been governed by the fear of death and desire for immortality and heaven. Ironically, this occupation makes him like live a somnambulistic life, which has to end in an unconscious death. In some rare cases, a few face it valiantly and with full awareness. A person involved in a train accident loses both his legs and yet does not lose his consciousness and smilingly dies after giving phone numbers and other instructions to those who are his companions at that time. An old man predicts his death and asks the family members to be prepared. Another man dies while reading the Bhagavad Gita. If we peep into the psyche of such persons, we discover that they have accepted death as an integral and inseparable part of life. Such persons learn that death is not an end of life, but its crescendo. When and only when we accept it totally, we are able to understand its great significance on each and every aspect of existence. Bodily death happens to be only the grand finale of continual death, which begins right from the very moment of birth. The biologists have proved beyond doubt that the cells are born and they also die continuously. All the cells, except the eye lens, get changed once in every 7 years. Even a common man on the street can feel that his bodily appearance is constantly changing. If you are sensitive, we have to be. When we take up the study of the Upanishads or take to the path of spirituality, we definitely see that the change is continual, not only at the physical level, but also at the mental and emotional levels. The thoughts and the emotions change at a much faster rate. If we but do a bit of retrospection, we are bound to realize that our relationships too have been changing along with our changing goals, desires, and dreams, and everything is a flux. Having taken death to be the phenomenon of change, it is not difficult to accept it. We experience death more intensely during our sushupti or the deep sleep state, when we are totally devoid of time, desire, as well as activity. And yet, when we wake up from sleep, we invariably feel refreshed and rejuvenated after a good night's rest. We even observe, I had a wonderful sleep, without for a moment giving a thought to the fact that we were dead to the world during our sleep. We are rid of all our responsibilities, all our desires, and tensions and fears. Truly, it has been observed by Brihadaranyukopanishad. Atra mata, atra pita apita bhavati, mata amata bhavati, loka aloka bhavati, deva adevaha, atra steno asteno bhavati, भ्रूणः अभ्रूणः चाण्डालो अचाण्डालः श्रमणो अश्रमणः तापसो अतापसः अनन्वागतं पुण्येन अनन्वागतं पापेन तीर्णो हि तदा सर्वान् शोकान् हृदयस्य भवति. In this state, a father is no father, a mother is no mother, worlds no worlds, the gods no gods, the Vedas no Vedas. In this state, a thief is no thief, the killer of an embryo no killer, a Chandala no Chandala, a Pulaska, one born to a low caste woman, or a warrior and a warrior no Pulaska, a monk no monk, a hermit no hermit, is untouched by good work and untouched by the evil work, for he is then beyond all the woes of his heart. Though Sushupti is a temporary death, we are not afraid of it. On the contrary, if we do not have proper sleep, we are concerned about our health. We are not worried about the change of the physical appearance, or for that matter, our desires and dreams and thoughts, which keep changing continually. Then why should you be afraid of the inevitable death? There is a very valid reason. During all these phases of change, which are no doubt indications of the imminent death, there is activity at different levels of body, mind, emotions, or even intellect and reason. And activity has always been associated with life. An Upanishad declares, Ayuh pranaha, prano va ayuh, prana eva mamrutam. Kaushitaki Brahmana Upanishad. When the prana exists, life is activity. Prana, activity is very life. Prana alone is immortal. When prana exists in a body, in that body, life exists. When we see a corpse, we observe that all the activities of the dead person have ceased. All his claims and possessions have been snatched away by death, and there is no hope of any revival. This observation creates a fear in us. We not only are reluctant to part from our possessions and relationships, but are really afraid of the stoppage of all activity. The irony is that, as far as the dead person is concerned, there is nothing. He does not get any elation because so many wreaths have been placed and songs are being sung in his praise. He does not feel pain when his body is either buried under the earth or burnt on the stake, nor any misery if his misadventures and limitations are recalled. Our culture has firmly declared that death and life go together, and the soul, in its long journey towards its fulfillment, takes birth and dies innumerable times. This repeated death that an individual faces and the death of others he sees initially creates a kind of curiosity to understand the phenomenon of death, which slowly gets transformed into an aspiration to transcend death. This has been described by Yoga Vasishta through a simile. A tortoise dwelling in a hole on the rocky shores of the ocean extends its head and legs and is at once lashed by a wave. It immediately retracts into the hole, withdrawing all the organs. As the wave recedes, the tortoise comes out again and is again hit by the wave. This is the story of man when he enters life waves of the samsaric ocean, characterized by involvement in the pairs of opposites and repeated life and death, give him constant blows. The entry is like the act of sticking out its head by the tortoise, and his death is like that of its withdrawal. When this happens repeatedly, gradually starts thinking of an alternate way of life. This is when Viveka dawns on such a person. Viveka is a development of consciousness which analyzes and helps in assessing life and its purpose. The shloka is Chalarnava Yugachhidra Kurma Griva Praveshavat Aneka Janmanamante Viveki Jayate Puman Laghu Yoga Vasishta. Repeated exposure to death, either directly through one's own or indirectly through someone else's death, brings in a feeling of futility in our so-called normal ambitions and goals, as ultimately everything and everyone is snatched away by it. Those who face near-death situations experience a change in their attitude towards life. If the feeling is not nurtured, then it passes off and one returns to one's own old ways of indulgence and involvement. Whether we accept it or choose to ignore it, death is the only certainty in the uncertain life. Having accepted death and plunged into a quest, what are the difficulties one faces? How can death become the preceptor? These are some of the questions that crop into the mind of the seeker. Kathopanishad answers all possible questions and gives hints to make the life's journey more purposeful. Each incident or a person is a pointer to the meaning and purpose of life. Existence is too patient to lift us up. It gives us so much freedom as to even allow us to go astray. After tiring himself with all the toys and games, the anguish of dissatisfaction, in spite of fulfilling all the dreams of secular life, forces man to evaluate his own life. This is when death opens the door for teaching of existence to man. This is when we notice death, which forces us towards the evaluation of life. If one is fortunate, the death will permit her or him to have a closer look that can become a turning point of life. The agony of a seeker in the beginning makes him search for a preceptor. In many spiritual traditions, Guru the preceptor has been called as death, for Guru takes the disciple to his voluntary death.